I have done some competition barbecue. I do okay at it. I'm not great. By no means am I great. I've been doing it for about 12 years. I have in fact won some things. I've done pretty good in all categories. Chicken's my best one, and sometime later on I'll do a chicken prep video. This particular one we come upon, we just recently moved to a small town that's just up the road from where we used to live. I happened to be digging around in their little teeny tiny market the other day and came across a bunch of racks of IBB pork. This is not something we find normally around here. The area we're in is hardly a hotbed for barbecue. In fact, it's really hard to find good authentic barbecue around here, but there's some people here that do pretty good. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of studying on the internet. I actually went to Johnny Triggs Barbecue School in February of 2018, learned more in 3 days there than I have in the last 11 or 12 years that I've been doing this. Anyway, so here we go. A real quick, just down and dirty thing that I like to do when I prep ribs. The prep that I'm doing now, I normally do the same, whether I'm doing a competition or for backyard, because one, it's good practice, and two, you get a feel for what's going on every time. There's always something a little bit different, so you can always learn a little bit something from this. Like I say, this is a almost 4-pound rack of IBP pork, the St. Louis cut. Just a standard St. Louis rack of ribs. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab me a pair of gloves that I forgot to grab. Hold on. Always, always, always do this with gloves on. You just never know what you're going to run into. Part of this also comes to the fact that you always, always, always want to wash your meat too. And I'll get to that in just a second when we clean these off. Just some good gloves. There are a few items that are always the most important thing in your kitchen. Everybody has their favorites, but the things that I find most important is a good sharp knife. This knife here is I shouldn't say extremely cheap knife. It's not a super expensive knife, but I've learned how to sharpen it myself, and it's a really good knife for what I use, and I'm not worried about damaging the blade when I do anything. Every couple of months I'll sharpen it again. Works really well. It's just a nice Hamilton Beach, typical probably $30, $40 knife. Anyway, what I like to do first and foremost when I do ribs is I always want to cut them open from the bone side. That way you're not nicking the meat as it comes out. Ooh, that knife needs to be sharpened again. Pull it out. You always, always, always want to wash it. And on top of that, you always, always, always want to wash with cold water. Now, I will say this. These are my preferences. There is no such thing as a right or wrong way as far as I'm concerned. Well, there could be a wrong way. The point is, this is the way I do things. And the simple fact is, if you follow them, that's great. If not, I would appreciate if you could give advice in the comments below, because that's kind of what I want to do here. I want to get to, where people, especially those that are just starting out, you get on these forums and these guys asking these questions over and over and over again, and you always get that one asshole that comes in and has to say, why don't you just read? Well, thing is try to search on certain things like that. It's kind of hard to get to a point to where you can find what you're looking for. So hopefully, those that are just starting out or have got some experience or whatever, I hope this helps. If you can come up with something that you do that's helpful. Anyway, so this particular one, this is a long time since I've seen this big of a flap on a piece of pork, on a rack of ribs. I actually like to cut that off just because it just doesn't really do any good. By the time it cooks the way I cook, the particular way I cook, it'll just get burned, plain and simple. You want to look real close at these big hunks of fat that are here, possibly get rid of them. You don't need to. I like to because I really like a clean rack. Who doesn't like a clean rack? And try to kind of clean that off. Now, the one thing everybody gets to is this little membrane. The membrane, this particular one's got some nicks in it, so I'm going to have to really be careful about pulling it off. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got these holes in it. One of the reasons you want to wash these racks especially is you never know what the butcher's done. Sometimes, if you don't wash them enough and actually get your hands in there and feel them, you'll find little bone spurs, especially where they've cut along the edges here. And the last thing you want is one of your kids to get a hold of that, or if you're like us, sometimes you throw your dogs a piece of the bone. So the last thing you want is somebody to get a hold of that. Wash it off good in the sink. Cold water. Only cold water. You don't want warm water. Anything you can do to help from getting the rack to get warm, because of course that's a safety issue. Food safety is important at times like this. Just make sure that when you wash it that you feel it really good. After you wash it, pat it dry, go over it really good with your hands, make sure that there's nothing hanging out, and just get a good look at what you're looking at here. This is actually a pretty good rack of ribs, but the bones aren't very straight. I probably wouldn't want to use this in competition, but for what I'm doing now, it's not too bad. Now, what you can see here is you can see how this membrane is pulled away from this bone. If I tried to pull the membrane away from there, there's another secondary membrane that's holding, it's kind of the fat layer that's in there, that's holding the bones together. If I tried to pull it off right there, I'd probably pull that secondary membrane off, and sometime through the cook, the bones and everything would probably just fall right out of it. So in this particular case, we'll start at the top. And you can see how the membrane's on the meat right there. Some people like to use a spoon, some people like to use a little knife, get under it a little bit. Also, another thing that's important to do is make sure the racks are cold when you do this. If they're too warm, you get too much of that slime on there. Get that to come up just a little bit. Grab you a piece of paper towel, get a hold of it, and just start peeling it off, making sure that you do not pull that secondary membrane off. And that's the thing about this is, as you can see, I have a little struggle with this because it's already starting to peel away. However, what I can tell you is just by feeling the way this is with the fat and everything in it, this is a beautiful rack of ribs. It is going to cook fantastic. So off she comes. Get a good grip on it. All these little pieces that are kind of left over. Just kind of want to just peel those off. Get as much of that off as you can. Now, some people will leave the membrane on. I prefer not to. Just simply because when it cooks, you know, especially when you're doing low and slow, or, you know, when you do any sort of a slow smoke or anything like that, I just kind of feel like it kind of turns into wax paper. It just doesn't, it's not real appealing. Anyway, so we've got the membrane off. Now we want to look at things really close. There's these little gobs of fat that we want to try to get rid of as much as we can. Clean this up as best we can. Now you do want to leave some of the fat on there because, of course, one of the rules is fat is flavor. Salt is a flavor enhancer. It's not a seasoning. Things like that. Okay, we'll turn it over like this. Now, what you can see here, you see how this little piece of meat's left right there? So, like I say, when I do any rack of rib, whether I'm doing it just for backyard, we've probably got family come over this weekend, so the first things I'll do is I'll take this little flap off right here. What this will do is when it cooks, it won't allow this, sometimes won't allow that fat to render down. What you end up with is just a big, basically grease ball. So clean that off a little bit. Turn that around this way so you can see it. Try to clean that off as much as we can. Now, after I kind of clean that up a little bit, what I want to do is I want to look at the top side of the bones. Boy, that thing's sticky. Top side of the bones. Count 4 bones over. What you'll find is you'll find a knuckle right there. Now, sometimes you can do another cut on these. It's actually called a, these are St. Louis. I've heard them call like a Kansas City cut, where they take a little bit more off the top. Don't really like them that way, but, you know, it works. So whatever you want to do. Huh?
What's a knuckle?
Oh, well, it's actually a joint. So it's basically just the joint in the rib right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, count that over. Now what I've also noticed, just because my wife distracted me like she's so good at doing,
Hey.
this end bone right here, the butcher caught it and actually cut part of that bone off. That's not going to cook very well for the way I cook. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take that bone off right there. We would have gotten to that eventually, but now that I'm looking at it, we'll take our knife, we'll come right over the edge of that bone, we'll just cut that end right off. Okay, got this piece hanging out here. We'll cut that little piece off right there. So first off, notice the shape of this rack. You can see how it kind of bows out. It's got this big gob here. So while we're right here, we'll also, and you don't need to do this, but this is what I like to do. You'll come over and you'll find somewhere on this end, you'll find a small bone, and it's right there. See a little teeny bone right there? So what I like to do is I'll straighten the rack out as best I can. Find that bone, and I'll actually cut that bone out also. Squares it up, makes it pretty. Now this piece that I just took off, that's actually a really good piece of meat. You can throw it on, smoke it for a little while, little nugget of something you can eat. while everything else is cooking. It'll get done a lot faster. Kind of a nice tester piece. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, come back to this. So we cut the one bone off. So the fourth bone, which in this case now is just the third bone, is the longest bone. All right, so on this now this is the third bone. We can feel the joint right there. So basically what I do is I try to follow that and square these all up to that line right there. Now, if you've been drinking a lot, sometimes this doesn't really work very well because your mind isn't with you. Lay it out. Get this end nice and flat. Look for that piece right there. Flatten the rack out as best you can. Find that mark. So we want to cut about right there, and you want to look about where your knife's going. And we can start and just whack that off right there. Okay. Now once again, you'll get a skirt. Now when you get the full racks of spares, you'll have that big skirt piece that's sitting out about right here. That's got all the other, the parts of the smaller bones and the cartilage and everything that's in it. That's also a really good piece to keep. You can either snack on that as you're eating, or that's about the best thing you can put in baked beans, barbecue beans. They work out really well. Okay. All right. So there we have. See how that cleaned up? Now we'll just take a knife, and these little edges here, these little pieces that are just kind of sticking out, we'll square everything up. And you see how with this little piece pointing out here, what that'll do is that'll just do nothing but burn. So we'll take that little piece off right there. Check this other stuff. We've got some fat here on the top we probably want to get rid of. Not a lot, just to clean it up. If it's pretty going in, it'll be pretty coming out. Kind of like your prom date. This one right here has got an odd little piece right there. There's a piece of cartilage in there, so we're going to want to just take that off, clean that up a little bit. There's a little hunk of cartilage right there that we just see somebody bite into that. You wouldn't want them to swallow that. Once again, as you're going through this and prepping your racks, you want to make good and sure that you're getting rid of any of this crap that might be, problematic. Because that's one thing that I fear is we have family over a lot. Between my grandchildren and my nieces and nephews and things like that, last thing I want them to do is bite into something and have it not be copacetic to what we're doing. Now, I've had other people that have told me, I've competed against some big names. I really won't mention them. But clean your rack up nice. Try to get it as smooth and clean as you can. Now, these bones out here are going to be a little bit thinner than the other ones. And when you put them on the smoker, you kind of want to just, clean things up. So this right here, we've got that little piece right there. I'll just trim that off. And there you go. So a real nice, clean, square rack. If you look at that, see that? It's nice and square. Taking these pieces off here so we don't have that big chunk there. So these bones here will cook good. These bones here now, everything up to about right there is all the same thickness. And when you put it on the smoker, and once again, I'm kind of going off, what I do, for the most part for competition. Once again, understanding I am not a super good competitor. I love going to competitions. They are a lot of fun. It's a, kind of a carnival atmosphere. But what I do is I actually end up getting my wife and my kids together when we go. So the nice thing is I tell people what happens when we go to competitions is I go to a barbecue competition and a family vacation breaks out. So it's the one time I can get everybody together. And we live fairly close to Nevada, so a lot of the competitions I go to are held, close to casinos. So there's that too. There's a lot more to it than just that. So anyway, okay, nice square rack of ribs. Those are actually going to cook really good. And I love the marbling on the fat on this one. You can see that, how it doesn't come clipped too high. It's not super thick, so that's going to render down really good into the meat. And actually, that's actually going to turn out pretty good. I'm actually looking forward to cooking those. Now, once again, the bottom side, this particular one's not too pretty because I'm going through it fairly fast, but it's cleaned up pretty good. There's not a lot of outliers, nothing funny sticking out. Check and make sure you don't have, something super sharp. But there you go. That's a really nice rack of ribs. And to start with, because it's a high quality rack, the IBP, Now, normally around here, because we don't get IBP, I normally get Smithfield, and I've tried all different kinds. The kind I really like is one that's called extra moist and tender. And they are enhanced. They do have the salt solution in them. But I've noticed they cook really super well. Flavor's good. And of course, the way I do my rubs, I make my own rubs and sauce, goes pretty good with that. They're just good. I tried the ones that are not enhanced at all, and it's really hard to find a rack that's over about 3.5 pounds. And by the time you trim it down and try to cook it and everything, it ends up being super small, and they're really hard to cook because your timing gets thrown off if it's too small, and if your pit happens to be running a little bit hotter than normal, or it's just really hard. You get a little bit heavier rack, these ones that are around 4 pounds, by the time you cut them down, they're just over 3 pounds, and they cook really super well. Anyway, okay. So that is a prepared rack of ribs as far as I'm concerned. Once again, if you have anything you'd like to add, I am all ears. So when we can sit down and cook, it's important to us. However, I will mention that we are always wanting to learn. That's the one thing I learned about my wife is you always have to be a student of what you're doing. You'll never know everything all at one time. But anyways, that's where we are. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope, if you watch this, that you actually gain something from it. If you have any questions, let me know. I know I went through that really fast. But for the most part, like I say, just make sure you wash it, clean it real good. Make sure you check for anything that could be sharp or whatever. Just get it good and clean. You never know what the butcher, you got to remember these butchers, when they do these, they're not taking time. They're going through and they're getting them out as fast as they can. They're just, there's good butchers and then there's, not so good butchers. But when you buy stuff commercially, that's kind of what you get. But yeah, I hope you learned something from that, and please let me know what you think. Like I say, if you have any questions or anything, please put it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. We're going to do, more of this as a series, a lot of different things like this, different things we've learned. My wife is a hell of a baker, and so she's going to be doing things with that too. So, happy smoking. And happy smoking to all. Thank you.